So welcome to the T Construction Podcast, and I'm Brad Levitt, and today we're honored to host Tracy Morris. Welcome, Tracy.
Hey, how are you, Brad?
Doing very good, and Tracy is coming at us from Washington, D.C., right? And she's owner of Tracy Morris Design.
I am. I'm right outside of D.C., thank goodness, because all of D.C. is closed today. So we've got a lot of road closures here in D.C.
A lot of fun the last couple of weeks, I'm sure, back home. So,
Listen, let me tell you, I would much rather be where you are right now.
My wife, she actually worked in D.C. In Georgetown for a while, and it was amazing. Yeah, so I don't know how.
That's where I had my office for years. So
It is.
that's such a small world.
It is. So she worked for Trammell Crow Company. So she worked for Trammell Crow doing real estate and design and marketing. So it's fun, as we've been married, and she really engages like with my business because she has a background in it. She understands it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Heck yeah, that's great. I mean, they were right down the street, so it's just such a small world. That's incredible.
Georgetown's an amazing place. I mean, we went there to visit, her work and all her employees and everyone, and went over to, there's like a cupcake place nearby, and then it's just a cute little place in Georgetown. So
It is. Right now, it's all boarded up.
is it really?
So, yeah. DC's fenced off. They've got military. It's pretty interesting. We are living in an interesting time right now.
It is. Well, hopefully we can bring some normalcy to everyone listening. We definitely don't want to take the political route. That's not that's not the topic that we'll be touching today.
Not even close, my friend. We're going to talk about pretty things and great construction. So
yeah, absolutely. And great business. So let me ask you this, Tracy. I mean, we're going to get into, I think what fascinates me about your business is when I speak with other builders and other business owners, right? One of the things you take into consideration is scale. Like, how do I scale my business? How do I get my systems in place? And you have been fortunate where you have an office in Dallas and Naples, DC.
Yes.
We spoke about, which we'll get into that part of it. But I guess just from a design business aspect, being a business owner, having remote locations, what have you learned that separates a good design business, from others?
I really honestly think the trick with this, and let's see, the business has been 20 years almost now. It doesn't seem possible. The trick is just don't move too quickly. Just do not take too much on. Because I know that feeling. I have a really great colleague that I love to death, architect here in Virginia as well, and he has spread himself so thin with projects in Coeur d'Alene, projects all over the country, and to be honest with you, Caribbean islands, those types of things, that he's so overwhelmed that he feels like he just can't take on anything correctly. So I think that really is the trick. If you know your lane, I know our lane is construction. I know our lane is larger format homes, and then we help people build from the ground up. But, Brad, I can't only take so many of those on. And you got to know that limit. So, once you start feeling like you're drinking from a fire hose, stop.
So I guess that's the challenge. Yeah, that's a challenge. I mean, when you think about scaling, there's a limit, and being in business 20 years, you understand the scaling, you understand what it's going to take from, we use the term manpower, but the staffing that you need, and what you can handle as a designer and owner with your team. So how do you manage, because the fine line is, well, I need to grow my business. I need the revenue. I have overhead. I have, I have to make payment right on payroll, like every 2 weeks. That's coming fast. So cash on hand is important. So how have you maybe refined, yes, we can take this job, or we're not ready, we're at capacity?
So we're dealing with that right now. As you know, you've seen with this, we've been so blessed being able to be considered essential employees, helping people stay in their homes, build their homes, create more spaces these days. I think the trick for us has been, I know I can only take on 4 major projects. And when I say, major for us is between, say, 10 and 20,000 square feet. So that's a really big for us. And I pick everything from soup to nuts, every hinge, so that level of project, I can only take on 4 a year because those last 3 years. Those are 3-year projects. But then we also have the smaller projects. We'll take on a living room. We'll take on, say, a first floor of somebody's house. And that will keep the payroll coming in because those smaller projects are honestly what keep month to month going. So I know if we've got, right now we have about 25 clients. and I have 5 big dogs, and we're getting rid of one of those is closing, and we're furnishing them and moving them in. But a lot of them, the majority of them, are smaller projects, and that keeps the money coming in the door. So that's always been my trick: is 75% smaller, 25% big.
I love that ratio, and I'm going to dive into that here in just a second. But I think going back to your, the large format, the large scale projects, what's really difficult is you and I have been doing this long enough where we understand the ebbs and flows, and recessions come. We lived through a big one 10, 12 years ago.
Ooh, yeah.
So where's that comfort level where capacity's 4, maybe 5, but if you have 2 that are coming to you, Tracy, saying, Tracy, we got to have you.
Yep.
How do you navigate that communication for a client that's excited, they want to start tomorrow, and you say, I would love to do it, but I may be 6 months out, I may be 8 months. I mean, how do you navigate that communication?
A lot of that's communication happens. I'm 100% beyond an over communicator in those instances. So I will tell them, listen, this is where I am. But the trick is, if I know that it's a really great fit and the client is just the perfect fit for us, I will make sure that we start with their selections. So for example, if we've got, typically I come in at the architecture phase. I will help the clients narrow down the plans, figure out where their grandmother's sideboard's going to be, or their brother's piece of art, those types of things with the architect. But those types of things can happen. I can easily do 1, 2, 3 meetings in a month if it's a larger project, because in the beginning, it's really heavy-handed with the architect. So the designer is not really handling a lot of that. So that already, in my mind, I already know I have 3 extra months. So then when I know we're going to have to hit hard on the selections, then I'll say to them, okay, we're going to communicate 2 or 3 times a month for these 3 months, and then we're going to, hit the ground running, say, in June or July, that type of thing. And that helps the client understand what their process is going to be and what they should be expecting. Because if we can manage expectations, then everybody's happy.
And at least we try. Yeah, we try. I think we do too. And that's the hardest thing, is managing expectations, especially, I'm sure from your side too. I mean, even from a designer side, you're not pricing the house, you're not pricing the finishes and everything, but they're changing. Prices are escalating for certain reasons, even finish costs, rough costs, hard costs. So that's a tough thing, where you're trying to navigate, meet the expectations of cost, you meet the expectation of timeline, and where maybe some of the professionals from the engineering and architecture side may be having challenges. The municipalities are having challenges getting permits approved. And so you're trying to navigate all this and set that clear expectation.
Absolutely. And to speak to that with the architects and the builders, I would come and sit down with you and say, hey, Brad, listen, we're going to do roll fixtures here. We're going to do Newport brass here. And I already work out all the allowances with the builder ahead of time, so that when we sit down, I already know what that client wants, because I've already done their interview. So we sit down, we talk through, we go through pictures, and then I sit down with the builder and we go through the allowances. So when that price, that estimate is set, we're pretty close. I mean, they switch things, of course, in and out. In a custom build, it's going to be that way. But I think it's imperative to sit down with the builder and have that conversation and know exactly what we're going to put where.
See, and I think that's really educational for the builder, for the designer, for the client. I feel like I'm not leading this charge by any means, but this is something I'm passionate about, that when our clients understand the value of, we have our architect, we have Tracy on board, we have AFT on board, or whoever the designer and builder team is, there's so much synergy and there's so much information that we can digest. We can work as a team. We can work on allowances. So that way, when we present that price at some point, we're trying to eliminate that sticker shock, right? Going back to you setting expectations, as you mentioned.
Exactly.
And it's so tough to do that. But there's advantage. If we're sitting down, you and I, Tracy, and we're like, okay, well, let's really dive deep into what's our kitchen hood allowance, right? What's our door hardware? What kind of tile? And as you mentioned, plumbing fixtures. Are we doing Newport brass? Okay, we have costs do change a little bit, but with that, it's a little bit more fixed. So we have a good idea of how to set those budgets.
Yeah, I think it's important also to really go through with the client, and they'll use keywords. For me, it's If I hear a lot of retail, if they, oh, well, we just bought that at Restoration Hardware, we bought this at Crate and Barrel, I'm going to know that we're doing a Signature Hardware or a lower end Kohler, So it's all of those keywords. If I'm hearing that a client has, bought this piece of art here or something like this, we're dealing with a totally different thing. And, but there's a budget with everyone. I don't care what anybody says. Somebody could be building the grandest home in the world. There's always a budget, and there's always sticking points with every client, whether they don't want to purchase lamps. They think lamps are ridiculously overpriced. They don't want them. We've got to figure out all of those kinds of things to work around. But it's my job to know what is going to be the biggest bang for their buck. If they're chefs and they're kitchen people, then I know I've got to find them the best hood that's gonna suck out all the stuff they're cooking on an evening, all those types of things, and the best heat, and so that's what we work on. And then maybe in the basement we go a little bit, the allowances are a little bit lower, but there is a fine balance with building a really beautiful home and making sure that there's lots of beautiful pop, but it doesn't have to be everything.
Yeah, there's a true talent there, not just a talent, but I think listening and going back to your expectations, understanding what the client's needs, their lifestyle, how they're going to perform and, use the home. You're going to lay that out. And you mentioned something when you have a good client and you're vetting them out, and you mentioned that this is a client we want because they fit, our mantra, they fit our style, or they fit our personality. So over the years, I'm sure this has become refined. So how do you vet a client, whether they're coming from out of state or them locally? I mean, how is that process, and how have you learned to identify certain things without throwing any clients under the bus, but certain things that may help you realize this is not a fit for me?
I do not ever want to, my famous phrase is, I don't ever want to overpromise and underdeliver to a client. So as a result of that is my true mantra. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So with that, if somebody has a truly, in my mind, unrealistic time frame, if somebody says to me, you know what, Trace, we're going to build a new house and I need it done in 6 months. It's not possible. I'm so sorry. It's not what we build. I cannot do that. I cannot expect my builders to do that. Other red flags for me are, I fired my previous designer. Big red flag. Okay, well, if that is the case, can you help me understand why? What happened? Was it a communication issue? Was it just a stylistic thing, or did it just not work? So that's a big one. I fired my designer. Another one is, we are almost there with our budget, but we're not quite there yet, but I want you to get started. Just hold off, give yourself a year, take all the time you need. You have to mentally be, as a homeowner, so comfortable with knowing that you're going to be building this and spending 20 to 30% more than you planned. And then you can get started. But other than that, no, I wouldn't recommend getting started if you don't feel comfortable with your budget. So those are some really big red flags for me.
I love that. And I was taking some notes because what's interesting is you pointed out a few things that I think are very common in my industry. One is schedule, right? So yes. Whether they're letting you know first off their expectation on schedule, or they're dictating, or we're trying to figure out what that schedule is, that's going to be a key because we've been doing this long enough. We know what it's going to take for the size and scale of these homes. So schedule is really important to ask those questions, because I think a lot of young business owners want to understand, how do you vet a client? The second thing, which I love, and I will share a quick experience on early in my career. So you said when they fired their previous designer.
Yes.
So I had a client out of state, and this was the worst experience I've ever had building. And and I take a lot of fault, but it's really helped define my career. So early on, just started my firm, and a client was referred to us by one of my trade partners. And she says, come to find out, she had fired her architect. She fired her designer. Yeah. She wanted us to do the remodel without a permit. All these things that are like red flag.
Red flag. Yeah.
And, I'm like, well, the permit is something we really can't work around. But yeah, you fired your designer, builder, or architect, whatever, and then it was painful. And, where someone's looking to be very litigious, had I had known, to look for some of these red flags, and again, as a client is very demanding, but yet very indecisive, and there's no designer, there's no architect to lean on and get answers, and it's difficult. And then budget is so key. If they are unrealistic about their budget, if they have these Pinterest or house pictures and they are not realistic on what that's going to cost, and it puts you in a really tough spot.
It does. And we don't take, doesn't have to be a multi-million-dollar project. I love helping everybody, and I think that's so much fun. I started out my company doing color consultations because that's my specialty. And those color consultations led to, why don't you do my basement, this, that, and the other. So that has always been fun, especially when you can just bring such joy to somebody with such small changes. That's such a blast. But when you've got somebody that has been dreaming about this house for years, and I watch the husband all the time, and I see the husband, and he looks at me and just goes, I'm thinking, so that's always a thing. And I'll set them aside, step aside and say, listen, I think you need to wait 6 months. I think you need to give this a year. Just breathe a minute and let me know what you think when you come back around. Because there's nothing worse than stressing yourself out over something you don't need to stress out over. So that's a big one. The budget's a big one.
It is. And you mentioned, I think, number 4, because you talked about schedule, their previous relationships, and then budget. But number 4, you just mentioned communication. How does the client communicate to you? How do they communicate to each other, to your trade partners? I mean, it was funny. There was a job, and having gone through that really bad experience, I learned a lot. So fast forward 2 years, I'm with a client who's vetting us, as their builder. They're building this home. He's a lawyer, which is fine. He and his wife are on the phone, and he starts yelling at his wife, like with me on the phone. And I was like, I'm out. Like, I had learned enough. I'm like, if he's first time meeting him, and he's going to have this tone, I'm like, I don't think this is a good fit, because I don't want to be that on the reciprocity, on the other side of that. Right.
Exactly. And the other, that you mentioning the litigious side of things, if I have heard, oh, well, we went to build this house, but we had to sue and I thought, oh no, I hear the word sue once, I'm done. I'm over. Because it should be a pleasant process. It really, really should. I know it's stressful. The budget can be stressful. The process can be stressful. But overall, again, you're building this incredible home. Like, it should be such a joyous experience and so much fun. But when I hear stuff like that, forget it. No. It's
a big one. I mean, so it's important as you're a young business owner to start looking for those 4 key things. And I love, the way we diversify ourselves and our companies is important, right? You still have to be specialized in our scope of work, because that's what separates us, and that's what creates systems and helps us to be on the right side of the ledger. But at the same time, as you mentioned, you have this 25-75 ratio. Well, these big projects are phenomenal. Those are ones that you chase because they're fun for the portfolio, and they're fun for the challenge that's involved. But the reality is you still have to have that month to month, and that's what that 75% fills in. And I think that's very valuable, because you may not, and it also expands your customer base, because depending on the economy, not everyone may be building a 10 to 20,000 square foot home. So you have to be able to showcase that, yes, we can still design for a living room, and we can still do a kitchen, because now it still gives you that lead generation.
Well, that's the important part. I mean, as a business owner, it's super important. You've got to have that revenue coming in on a regular basis consistently. And I had learned in the beginning, with these really big projects, we make our money on furniture. Let's get down to brass tacks. We make our money on the actual materials, and we are an unusual sort of set of designers, because we do order all of our materials for our clients typically, because when it gets to be 20,000 square feet, the builder is so overwhelmed. So we do the spreadsheet, we put it all together. Typically I'll place the order and then help the builder with that, because it just gets to be too much. But if you don't have the money from those materials coming in, and all you're making is money on time, it can be a lot of time. But those large homes, that is, you are not ordering furniture for at least a year. So you better know that if you've taken on 4 of those, you have no capital to work with. Yeah, in the beginning. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest thing. And so you have to figure out, and it's a little complex too, because when you're doing all the furniture, I mean, you have to figure out storage and handling and shipping and install, right? You have to have your own install crew who's going to install it all and hang my mirrors and hang my artwork and the gallery walls. I mean, so there's a lot that you're managing too outside of just a design process.
Oh, absolutely. And because my background is construction and we have done this my whole life, it's so funny thinking about, I've got the guys, again, like you said, we have our whole installation crew. And then with that, there's 5 to 6 days after that, like you just explained, wallpaper hanging. There is I've got the separate art and mirror people. And all of this is such a process and such an orchestration. It's kind of like planning a really crazy big event or wedding. That's the only way I can describe it, because yeah, think about it. It's like a big wedding because you have all this hype and all the furniture goes in and then, oh, I don't know if I like it, all of those types of emotions. And I tell everybody, and this is definitely for the new young designers out there, make sure you give your clients a small order that says you may not call me for at least 2 weeks when your stuff has been put in, because you need to take a minute, get used to the furniture, the paint, the wallpaper, whatever it is that's been put in place, and just breathe a minute, because you're not used to it and it may feel weird. We'll always take care of it, but at the same time, give yourself a minute and just have the client sit with that, all of those new things, and not call you right away and say, I've got to have this changed out. No, just take a minute and let it all sink in.
That's phenomenal advice, because I was just going to ask you, it's a very strenuous process. And I want to talk to designers and they're like, Brad, I'm on an install. I know that, for 3 or 4 days, they're going to be incommunicado, right? I'm not going to be able to talk to them. They're going to be buried. It's very overwhelming. They're not going to have their phone on them because they're physically going through and directing and installing and everything. It's a very complex process. So I was going to ask, what have you learned through that process and refined? And you mentioned that, going back to your expectations, that telling the client, live in it, wear and tear a little bit, give us 2 weeks, because everything's new. Everything's in a different place. You're coming from your existing residence and now this, and it's totally different.
Right. And the other thing that I can tell young designers that I learned probably about 4 or 5 years ago, when we started doing the really big houses, I got each of the ladies on my team a backpack, and it's our installation backpack. It has a screwdriver, a paintbrush, felt pads for underneath chairs. So anything you're going to need for an installation. And then each one of them has, from their backpack, they pull out a fanny pack that holds their phone, a measuring tape, scissors, a box cutter, all of those kinds of things. So that's on them at all times, because if you've got a 20,000 square foot house and you forgot your backpack in the family room and you're working on the other side in the master bedroom, what a waste of time. Put it all on you and just be able to get your job done.
That's phenomenal. I mean, it's that efficiency side of things, and
yes.
Instead of having them try to truck around a big tool belt, it's like, well, the fanny pack, backpack works perfect. And you have those essentials, maybe a black Sharpie or something to, fill in, which we sometimes need.
Yep, we've got all that stuff, and food. We have food in there.
Some snacks too.
Because you're going to get hungry, so we have to have those things in there too. That was all my husband's idea, actually, because he's a crazy efficiency master. So he came up with that one.
And is he involved in the business at all?
He's not. He actually owns he's an entrepreneur himself and owns a company called Core Performance. They make freezable, wearable water bottles for military, law enforcement, and the service industry. So,
well, that's amazing. Well, it's probably fun. I mean, even though you're not in the same industry, as business owners, and working, I'm sure there's ideas you can bounce off to refine that process. And
couldn't imagine not having him. Oh my gosh, he helps me so much. So, but that backpack idea was his. And if any designer out there, architect, whomever has a install, get yourself a backpack, put your logo on it, whatever you want to do, and wear that thing, and you've got everything you need.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So one thing that we do on our side is, I've spoken about this on our YouTube channel. We do what's called a super walk, or like a team walk, like an AFT construction team walk. And so
I've seen this. It's cool.
Yeah. So what happens is, as you get to the end of a project, as we all know, my super becomes snowblind, and they end up, you're walking the house for a year and a half, and you could walk over the same thing and you just don't see it because you've been there, and it's nice to have another set of eyes. So what we do is, it's a great team building, but it's also very efficient. So we come out when there's probably about 4 to 5 weeks left in that QC process as we're closing a home. So we come out with all 13 of our team members here at AFT, and we'll tag the house. And so the superintendents describe, and sometimes they say, it's not that it's humiliating, but they feel like, because we're taping the house, we're punching.
Of course, there's blue. It looks like a blue explosion, right?
Explosion. Yeah, blue and green tape explosion. But the advantage is, that's a process where now we have another set of eyes we're going through. And what I've noticed is my supers, they'll have the little tool belt on, and they'll have their tape measure, they'll have their black Sharpie, they'll have their tape, different colored tapes because they have different meanings. And it's very efficient, where instead of trying to share tape, everyone has their own, and it makes it more efficient, going back to your backpack idea. But it's just another way where we've refined that process to help get to the end result that we're achieving.
That's fantastic. What a great idea. I was just walking a job site with my super on one of our larger jobs, and he there's a shoe on the end of our baluster, and he looks at me. I said, David, the shoe's wrong. We're talking banisters for days, right? And he looks at me and he goes, what do you mean? I said, it's supposed to be round. You got square. He goes, oh my God. It's all those types of, he's on the job all day long. He didn't see it. So poor thing, all of them had to get cut, and we had to pull them all out, and they're replacing it with the round shoe. But you're 100% right. You get so engrossed in what you're doing on a daily basis that you lose that ability to detail, because you're just making sure that the dumpster gets dumped and everything gets done on a construction site.
And that's the hardest part, because the fine line is, we're trying to drive the schedule, right? You're trying to schedule the paver guys and the brick guys, and you're trying to get everyone out there without, the quality is really important in that flow of construction. And, even if we tell our superintendents, you got to know your project, you got to have an understanding, memorize the design book. We live and die by the design book. Architectural plans are important, but, especially as you get past frame stage, we live and die by the design book. But there's so much detail, as you mentioned. So it's easy for a super to overlook that if, as with everything else going on in the home.
Oh my gosh, yes. That's why it's imperative for us. Each client has a binder. And I know I've talked to so many people about how the design industry can be automated. And as folks have realized, no, it can't. There are certain portions of it that can be, but so much of what we do is so hands-on, it's impossible. So we still have binders, and every time we do an installation, we have an install binder. It has a clipping of the fabric, it has a picture, and all of our floor plans, exactly where things are going, because not everybody who designed that room is going to be able to be in it to know exactly what goes where. So we give a paper copy of that to our design install team, our movers, and they're so fortunate that they're so grateful for it. They're so sweet. And we slap up things on the wall that say living room or what we've called it, so they know where they're going. So the install process is a little bit easier, but we do our best to try and get it all done, but nothing's ever perfect.
It's never perfect.
No.
And you can streamline, as you mentioned, the best you can. And so what's your background, Tracy? To have the successful firm you have now, despite the locations where you work, what was your training to understand how to bid and price, your wages for a remodel as opposed to a custom home, and the furnishing side, whether it be margin or markup, or, design fees, and how you open up your database of manufacturers you're working with and suppliers? How has that evolved, and how did you learn those skills?
It was all trial and error, my friend. Oh my gosh. I am not what you would call the typical designer, because I grew up, my aunt and uncle flipped houses in Baltimore in the 80s before flipping was flipping. So I would scrub aggregate, stain floors, hang cabinets, do all of those kinds of things as a very small child. I loved it. It was always in my blood. But my mother did not want me to be an interior designer. She said, you'll never make any money. I don't want you to have to go out on your own, the whole thing. So I had to hide the fact that I was studying interior design in school. My father knew, my mother didn't. So I know. So I actually have a business communication degree, and then I have a 3/4 degree in design, because I cut out all the commercial classes. I knew I wasn't going to be a commercial designer. So I got out of school. I started planning events. I worked for the .com when that was a big thing. And everybody in the office kept asking me to come do their house. To me, it made no sense. I was like, why are you asking me to do your house? But okay, I'll come over. So I started selecting colors and hanging pictures for $25 an hour at 22 years old. And that's how I started. And I had no clue what I was doing. So I learned from guys like you. You would tell me, how to bid something, I mean, they don't teach you that in design school. They don't even teach you how to measure a drape in design school. So none of that is taught, but it was 100% self-taught with really, really great architects and builders like yourself that really pulled me along. And it's been 20 years.
So when did you feel that you hit that tipping point? Because, starting out, here you are, $25 an hour, doing paint, doing art,
Yes.
and then all of a sudden now you're doing some of the upper scale projects throughout the country. So where did you find that tipping point where you're like, yes, I know my wheelhouse, I know my strength, and I know how to market, my talents?
Just as you mentioned that you had a really eye-opening experience, if you will, with that particular client that you learned a lot from. That was a bad experience for you. I had the opposite in one aspect. I was hired by this amazing woman. She was Swiss, and she, for whatever reason, thought that I was going to be the best fit for her. Here I was, hardly any experience, 27 years old. She picks me up. She moves me down to Florida. So I worked on 3 homes for her in Florida. She takes me over to Switzerland with her. We work on her home there. And I am telling you, that was the best design school. She had the most extraordinary taste, the most extraordinary antiques, artwork that you could ever imagine. And I spent 3 years with her. And I lived with her. I lived in the home we were working on. Originally, this is such a crazy story. Originally, she had purchased a home and the house was needing to be remodeled. Brad, I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, zero. And I was in a completely different town. I hired every subcontractor. I managed the entire construction project, 27 years old. I had a blast. And then she ended up not wanting to build that house, and she bought a house across the street. And then I had to finish the construction on that one. But imagine, 27 years old, the house was 17,000 square feet. I didn't even have a fabric account opened, not one. So you want to talk fake it till you make it. That's exactly what it was. And she was so patient and so kind. And I thank her every day for all the amazing opportunities and experience she gave me. But that was really my tipping or turning point, knowing that, you know what, I got this. I can do it.
So it's amazing. You think about that story and just the mentorship, I mean, and her willingness to take a risk on you. But what do you think she saw? I mean, why was she willing to do that with you, Tracy, where you didn't have that portfolio yet, to do that scale? I mean, it's not like you're a general contractor and here you are running this. I mean, how did you meet her? And I guess what do you think made her take that leap?
So she was a friend of a friend, and I met her a couple of times, and I'm going to be totally honest. She called me the fat Virginia girl. She's like, I'm not hiring that fat Virginia girl. Hysterical, right? I really should finish the book. I have about 20 or 30 pages of this book started because it's just such an insane story how I met her and the whole thing. She said, I'm not hiring that fat Virginia girl. And obviously, life has changed. But I thought, okay, I'm going to let her come to me. I'm a really, really big believer in intuition. I'm a big believer in signs. And I remember, thinking to myself, just sit back. We'll see how this goes. And ironically enough, she was a friend of a friend, and I was with that friend, and we were in a fabric store, and she happened to be there. We were talking like it was such serendipity, it was crazy. And she comes up to me and she says, okay, can you figure out some fabrics to go with this? And I said, sure. I'm putting it all together. I'm telling her this blue linen should be with this, the whole thing. And she looks at me and says, will you come to Florida with me to work on my house? And I later asked her why. And she said there was such a purity in your ability to be able to select things. You hadn't been tarnished yet. And I thought, interesting. So she really wanted that pure, non-bitter, I guess you could say, I guess it was a pureness, innocence to me. And that's why she hired me. And it was really an amazing opportunity and such a fun project.
That's incredible. So, from there, what made you, I guess, is that the reason you open up an office in Naples?
Yes. So I actually, I have a really great architect friend that's in Naples. And we do not technically, I don't want to make it sound like we do. We do a lot of work in Naples. So we've got a satellite, location that we can pick and choose and do all those sorts of things from. But yes, my husband he lived in Dallas. So I've got a lot of clients that are in Dallas. And then I have a lot of clients that are in Naples. But the irony of it is, she wasn't in Naples. She was in Boca. So yeah. So Naples, we spent enough time there vacationing or with family and friends that the word got out, and I've started doing a lot of work down there too. So between Dallas, Naples, and DC, it's managed, but it's crazy.
That is busy. So do you actually have physical brick and mortar offices in those locations, or is your home base there in DC?
No. Home base is in DC, and then I will go, my offices are to go sit in with my friends that are architects, and I will work out of their offices, but we bring everything from DC to those locations. So that's how that's managed. Brick and mortar would be way too much for me. I couldn't handle that.
Yeah, that's a lot, because then you become a little bit more the people managing business and the design business.
Exactly. So this is more satellites being able to handle, say, 3 or 4 projects in each location at a time. But those are the spots that I really like to specialize in.
Yeah, and those are great cities in the country. A lot of opportunity in Naples and Dallas, of course, a lot of growth, beautiful projects in all those areas. Where else have you worked, and done projects throughout the country?
Well, my husband wants to move where you are. So, he's a big Arizona fan. We're actually in Scottsdale and Phoenix a lot. So the next time I'm there, I'm coming to see you.
Yeah, you have to.
In person. But no, I've done a couple houses on Scottsdale, San Diego, the Hamptons, New York, North Carolina. We actually had 3 homes on Puerto Rico, which was a lot of fun to do. That was a blast, trying to figure out how to get stuff to a true island. That was a challenge. But we've worked in a lot of different states all over the country. And then, of course, I worked in Switzerland. So that was a lot of fun.
Which is fun, a little international there with Puerto Rico and Switzerland.
Yeah.
So, going back to the business side of things, how have you learned, I guess, I would imagine doing the construction enhance your education there, which now helps with design because you understand the other side of it, what the contractor's dealing with because you dealt with that yourself. So how have you refined, I guess, the financial side, understanding your cost to do business, your, whether it be hourly rate or square foot cost, because doing these large homes, as you mentioned, they take a lot of time and that clock can continue to tick, so how have you refined that process or job costing over the years?
The larger projects, again, as I mentioned before, I space it out by quarters, 3-month periods of time. In the beginning, the majority of it is going to be time. I charge by the hour, and I also, charge each one of my ladies out by the hour as well. I work on retainer because that has been much easier for me to do, and I feel it's a little bit more palatable for clients to be able to swallow the costs if they know what they have paid up front. So I know a lot of designers that bill at the end of the month, and it's a lot like a lawyer, and it gives people just a lot of anxiety. Every time they're opening that bill at the end of the month, and I don't want to have that. So what we do is we bill on retainer, and we receive that retainer, and then our clients get a statement of exactly what the hours that were used for that month, and then they get a balance as to what they have left.
Now, let me ask you a question with that, if you don't mind. So, one thing I've noticed is, how descriptive are you? Because I've seen designers do a lot of different ways, and I've worked with a lot where some are hourly, some are square foot, some are retainer. And, I find that the more information you give, if you said, hey, I'm looking at a paint color, for 1 hour, or choose a grout color, they may it took you 1 hour to find a paint color and it's $175, you get that. So how have you refined, the statement of hours and maybe the description where it is a little more palatable for the client as they look at that?
Well, I also like to be super upfront. We are not the least expensive designers in the area. So, I am super upfront with what our hourly rates are, and what the ladies' hourly rates are. And if that doesn't work with you off the bat, then I'm not the right fit. I don't want this to turn into us arguing about, oh my gosh, why did you bring another designer with you? I don't want to have to pay for both of you, that whole thing. I am definitely not the right fit because we hit the ground running hard. And when we go into a project, I don't want to waste your time or your money. So we want to do it quickly and as efficiently as possible. And I do that with my team. So I know for myself, we charge by the hour, but also we do a markup on furniture. So we're hourly for our time, and then we do a markup on our furniture, and our markup is 30%. So everybody has a different percentage that they prefer to utilize. And I have some designers that do not charge a markup for furniture, and they charge a much higher hourly rate. So there's lots of different ways people do it. But I know for me, managing cash flow, that has been the best way to do it.
I love that strategy. And it's funny because I had a client later who was a lawyer, a great guy. And it was funny because even as he would push back on certain things, at the end of the day, he said, Brad, it's funny because from my side, I have clients that push on me on my hourly rate as a lawyer, right? They push back. And I find that, the more a client pushes back, like I spend more time working through invoices and accounting. It's like, I'm not doing what I do best, which is fighting their legal battle, And so maybe I've had a failure and breakdown of expectations, like letting the client know upfront my hourly rate and what that entails. And, what it's because, going back to the paint example, well, it may have taken you 2 hours. I don't know. Maybe it only took you an hour, but it's not like you're just looking at some paint samples. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. And maybe you're painting a sample on your wall or having your painter do it. And then you're checking with the finishes and furnishings. Like it's a very complex issue. And sometimes going back to what the comment you made earlier in the discussion was expectations, setting those, the customer's going to a little bit understand more your value.
It is. And we are pretty detailed in our explanations of the hours. But at the same time, I make sure, Brad, to take my clients with me to smaller things. So for example, I'm going to take them, not all the time, but just if it's somebody that there's a bit of friction with the hours, I'm taking them with me to the carpet store and they see exactly what goes into it and how many emails we're answering afterwards about, did that sample get to them? And oh, wait, but we need this sample too. And that particular mill, this one is out of stock. So we have to swap it out with this. There is a lot that goes into this. And I have a drawing on Maha's wall, one of the ladies in my office, and it's a picture of a horse. And it's a perfectly drawn, tail and sinuous muscle and leg, sort of the back part of the horse. And then the front part of the horse is a stick drawing. And it says, when a client asks me to do it cheaper.
Yeah.
And that's what it is, because I can't do it less expensive. If you want it beautiful, there is a way to balance that out. But at the same time, please don't ask me to do that, because you are going to cut me off at the knees and you are not going to get the creativity and the end result that you're looking for.
Well, I love the example you gave about that it's a smaller task, right? We know how complex your job is as a designer. I respect our designers so much because I know what you do, the decision-making and the time that goes behind it. I've seen that firsthand, but a client may not have. And so taking them on a small excursion where they see the pain, blood, and tears that go into maybe the carpet, which is such a minor element to the home. And then they say, oh, I get it now.
Oh, I got it now. Oh, I'm not going to bother you on that anymore. Okay, thanks. I'm like, but then that we get in the car and they're like, wow, that was pretty involved. And I said, look at your watch. And they're like, oh, that took an hour and a half. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it's still not done. And we still have emails, as you mentioned. There's other, right. There's a lot more than we got to put in the document drawings and the CDs and everything else that we're doing. And so I love that, because for me, when you look at a company, your business strategy, well, who are you marketing to? And your demographic that you're marketing to. And there's advantages to that. If you know that working with someone who's a second-time home buyer or second-time home builder, not, this is their second home as in lieu of their first, right. That experience is going to be a little bit better because they've been through it. They understand the challenges, the pitfalls, and so, or maybe a client that has out-of-state properties. And so you really understand your dynamic, and that's who you're catering and targeting to.
Right. And I will tell your listeners, it's so interesting. I think I know that demographic. I've got it down so well, right? We've set those things on Instagram and got the whole thing done. And I am telling you, sometimes how I get clients and who comes to me, I'm still blown away. And I think, all right, God, what's going on here? Because I've never even talked to that person, or, I haven't seen that person in 12 years. Like, how did they remember me? It's just, never give up hope as to where you think you're going to. Set those demographic boundaries, but at the same time, don't be so linear in your thinking that you don't leave room to have other things come in.
It's funny you say that. You think about, the networking part of it, which you're alluding to, right? People that you meet at different functions or events, or maybe coworkers of the past, Tracy. And, I look at it this way. I mean, now as I'm aging, right, and I see, well, a lot of my friends that I was in college with or played sports with at a younger age, well, now they're nestled in their careers and they're at a point where some of them have been very blessed financially and have done really well. And cultivating those relationships early on pays off now when I'm a known entity. They know me, and it's like, okay, Brad, we're at a point in our life where we're ready to build a home, or we're ready to do this project. And now it puts us in an opportunity because you've cultivated those relationships. And so there's an investment we all make in time, effort, and friendship. And that payback may not be tomorrow, but it could be in 12 years, as you mentioned.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so funny when you said that, I was like, we're not old enough for that, right? I'm like, wait a minute, my friends are still in high school. What are you talking about? I feel like that all the time. I'm like, wait a minute, how old am I? But at the same time, that investment, I don't ever believe in burning any type of bridge. There'll be issues with clients or this, that, or the other. And, my husband will make a comment, or other designers or what have you. Oh, you should know. You know what? I'm not going to. We're going to work through this together. We're going to find a common solution. And sometimes that common solution is to just part ways. But I don't think anybody needs to do it in an angry way, because you never know what's going to turn the next corner or come around the bend. And I'm a big believer in what goes around comes around. And I feel like, I love my clients, and I'm I try so hard to be good to them. And I believe that comes around, and they know that, and they recognize it. And it's the same with you. People want to work with you because they see the integrity and the just effort you put into things, and it pays off. I really do believe that.
Yeah. And I think there's some advantages too to social media, because in a very, non-confrontational, non-salesy way, you can showcase your product, your brand, your company culture, your people, your process, and it's a way to document and show the stuff. And that's why I always counsel people, if you're not on social media, make sure you're on there, right? Because these are Instagram, and you're really good. I watched your story the other day when you were talking about paint colors, and you're in the bathroom and you had the tub and the tiles, and you're like, look at the different colors of the tile, but you're instructing and teaching. And it's very interesting to watch. You're engaged, where I feel like I'm being taught by Tracy, and I'm like, okay, I can see what goes in her thought process as she's making this selection.
Well, it's so funny because I was lucky enough to be on a local podcast here for one of our magazines, Home and Design Magazine. And I just had a client call me. She said, oh, I was so nervous about calling an interior designer. My builder's my friend, the whole thing. And she said, I watched you on your podcast. I had been referred to you, but I was too afraid to call you. And I thought, why? And she said, oh, it's such a nerve-wracking process. But I saw you on the podcast and I felt much more comfortable. And I thought, well, now you know me, So it's just, I think it's a good way to help everybody get to know each other a little bit better. And boy, has social media been a super big help for us. It's been great to be able to put out our work, and again, like you said, be able to communicate with people, but not have to call every single individual. So it's great.
Well, to connect, I mean, look, that's how we're connected, right? You're in DC, I'm in Scottsdale. Had never met until Instagram, and we're connected. And it's funny how those relationships are built there. So where are you finding your lead generation? As a business owner, that's a constant stress that I have, that you have, is filling that pipeline, helping our team. So where do you find most of your leads coming from?
So it is a combination. It is, I would say we are 80% referral. So whether it is previous clients or having them do another home in another location, or they're moving. And then let's see, a lot of our work comes from our builders, architects, and our contractors, just the regular contractors, not necessarily our custom home builders. But they know that I can speak the language of builder. And that is somewhat of a rarity in the design world, where if I can't build it, I'm not going to make you build it. So I'm not going to, I always get the look when I walk on a construction site, oh boy, here's the 5'3" blonde, what is she going to make me do? And then, we start talking the talk, and they're like, oh, okay, she can hang, So it's a thing. And then they realize that, and then they'll refer me, obviously. Oh, well, let's just use Tracy. It makes life easier, the whole thing. But then I would say 20% comes from Instagram. We get a lot of folks on Instagram.
Which is amazing how Instagram has changed that. But going back to your example, and I think this is what is important for builders to hear as well is that, look, we expect as builders, not that we expect, but it's very advantageous when our designers understand our process. They understand my headaches. They understand the challenge of trades and labor and execution and things we're trying to figure out within budget and client demands. It's so great when the designer understands it, as you mentioned, and you've been on that side, you understand it, you come in and it just puts the builder at ease. But the builder as well needs to do their homework and understand, well, what does the architect deal with, right? What's he dealing with his engineers and other professionals and the city and the municipality? And then what's my designer dealing with as they're thinking through furniture and layout and they're figuring out their client expectations and then what they're expecting me to do. And the more we can put ourselves on the other side of the ledger or understand like a day in the life of Tracy, well, that's going to make me a better builder because I'm going to cater a little bit more to my designer. And that's going to cultivate that relationship because you and I could talk about this all day. If you have good builder, good designer, good architect, and they get along and they communicate, it's going to be an amazing process for the client.
It is, when you have that team, it is the most synergistic thing I've ever experienced. And I'm telling you, I think that is my favorite part of the job. First of all, I love walking a construction site. I was just on one more than anything in the world and seeing the progress and how it all is coming together. But when you've got that builder and that architect and the designer, either they've worked together before or it's a new relationship and it just click, 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 click. It's like the locks of a vault, you know, it's just amazing. And yes, it's so important for me to understand. You've got to know your window color and your roof color so that we can move forward. Next, you know, we got to get our long lead items going, our cabinets, all of those things, so that you aren't sitting there twiddling your thumbs with an entire team of subs that you've got to pay. So I have to understand that. And with the architect, I wouldn't want to have to deal with structural engineering or anything. No thanks. So, or the permitting process, all the runners, especially here in DC with all the historic areas. What a pain in the tush. So they're doing an amazing thing, but we all have to understand each other. And if we're understand each other and we are kind, I think life is easier.
And I think that's a big part too, because going back to the design thing, you know, I've spoken to builders and they're like, oh, why would I have a designer? Like it makes my life more complicated. That's someone else I got to appease and keep happy. And then I have to execute what they want. And the funny thing is, you know, well, you have someone that's going to make your portfolio better. You're going to have someone that brings value to the client for resale, for peace of mind. And so understand the value they bring. It's a win-win. Like you have to do that. And so from your side, Tracy, being that you do 75% of your work with remodels, which means you're working with a lot of general contractors. You're doing the big homes. You're working in Naples, Dallas, DC, Scottsdale, San Diego, as you mentioned, all over the country. What separates that good team? What separates that good builder from the others? Like what are some of the attributes or communication skills that the builder's offering that you're like, this is a good builder and someone I want to work with again?
I will tell you, I think the biggest thing, and we've got a job where it is not synergistic right now, and I was just brought in on it, and I love the client. They're absolutely fantastic, but the contractor blames everybody. And I think that word is the biggest word. It's like please don't blame, because you know what? I'm going to have your back. But as long as I'm going to have your back, I know you're going to have mine. So if I walk into a meeting and that builder says to me, oh, well, the designer hasn't gotten me the floor specs, so we can't move forward. Okay, now wait a minute. Why didn't you call me and tell me you needed the floor spec? There's all those kinds of things. So I always get together with the builder team to get, right away. I am infamous for my chocolate chip cookies. I always take cookies to the job sites. I bake cookies. I stand there with the architect, the foreman on the job, and the site super, and we have a cookie. And we stand there and talk it all through. Now listen, if this person, and once we sort of know each other and understand each other's picadillos, as long as there's no blaming, I think we're fine. And I think that is where it makes a good team into a great team. Because when you start pointing fingers, boy, does that energy of that job site just tank.
Well, not only the energy, but I've seen it where now what you're doing is you're almost cornering somebody who's going to fight for themselves too. And so you're putting, okay, well, if that's, if you're not going to defend me or have my back, then, everyone's now fighting for themselves, which is going to hurt the client. And it's funny because we've been so big on culture and communication and our designers and architects, that's our loyalty. Clients are everything, right? But clients come and go. Like they do. And if we don't have our design team and architect team in place and they're not good, and our trade partners, like, we're only as good as they are. So at the end of the day, we can only perform. And we had an instance where, not to throw my team under the bus, but it was a small thing. Our field team had a meeting with the client. They failed to let the designer know with enough time to be there. The designer could not make that appointment, justifiable, because they only had 48 hours notice. And then the client had some questions at the walk and says, why is my designer's not here? And then my team said, well, the designer was asked, but they couldn't make it. And you're like, no, just something that small. It's not like they're trying to be malicious, and they're not. But now the designer's upset, and it's these little things, and you hit the nail on the head. It's blame. How can we communicate better to say we should have been more prepared? We didn't give enough time. Like, we should have had that and fall on the sword, and we move forward, because really it did come on us as the GC.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, I think about it. I've got one right now that we have an athlete that I just adore, and he has moved his mom here. And we're working on, but I was told that the house was purchased right before Christmas, and the house was move-in ready. No, it's not. But we are literally gutting this house back to the studs, Brad. So knowing, and I had to get a materials list together in 3 days. I mean, it was just, one of those types of things. I've got my mom yelling at me about Christmas, all those sort of things. But at the same time, they're dealing with management people, of course. Everybody's got their, so we've got 3 or 4 layers of people. And I just talked to the client about 15 minutes before we started our talk. And she said, I'm not getting any of the emails. So after you and I finish here, I'm going to send an email with everybody and make sure everybody's up to date, because those types of small communication holes, just like you were talking with your team, if those rip into, big craters, it's really tough to recover.
It is tough, and I had to call the owner of the design firm, and we spoke, her and I, and we worked it out, and we're in good terms now. But it's not that you can't fix some of those things, but you have to stop it before it becomes a blame game. And which is tough. And I think that's an important thing as a business owner, is looking at the end goal, right? Looking at the big picture, not worrying about the little things, because projects come and go, and some of them we lose. Like, we're lost leaders. We didn't do so great. But it doesn't mean that we can't take that information and learn from it and then apply that to the next one.
You got it. Exactly. So the word blame is the one that I would say makes a good team a great team, as long as that word is crossed out.
And I would imagine for you that when, as you alluded to with your client, that when the house is ready by the contractor for furniture day, that we're actually ready and we don't have 15 trucks of subs in the house trying to cabinet touch-ups and paint as you're moving in sofas.
I know. I think about it. I had to have a long conversation with one of my favorite contractor builders here, and he is just near and dear to my heart. 18,000 square feet, and they had not even started punch. Not even started it. Client had to move in, had to move in. And I sent him a little note, and I said, you're going to sign this. I love you to death, but if you spill paint on my $40,000 Ushak, I'm going to be really upset. So we had an understanding, and but we were moving in sofas when they were painting the staircases and doing all that stuff. So, but stuff happens. He was happy enough to do it. We had an understanding, and there was only one can of paint kicked over. Only one. Only one. I know, right? Yeah. So we did pretty well.
Yeah, because the hard thing is, as a builder, it's like you put this $30,000 rug down, and then you have your drywall standing over the rug, right? So it's like just those little things that you're trying to knock out. Or
you've got somebody with Minwax stain, and you're like, oh, yeah, all that stuff. I get it. I mean, but it is what it is. You cannot prevent. The guys need to work. And the one thing that I always have to tell my clients, you're moving into one of these big dog houses, expect 6 months of men in your house every day, because your dampers aren't right. Your hot water is cooler here, and it's just expect people to be in your house every day. It just is what it is. Do not get frustrated. Know that everybody's here to help. And there's a lot of cajoling and talking and all of that, but you got to understand that we actually put that in our contracts to expect that, and that even with our end, there are going to be seams that come apart. There are going to be carpets that curl. There are going to be, chairs that the little foot might fall off of. I'm going to take care of it, but it's going to happen. It's not possible to have everything perfect immediately.
I think in closing, I think that's one of the most valuable things you mentioned, and it goes back to the continuance of the expectations that you've driven home the whole time, Tracy, is, putting it in your contract, because the reality is on a 10,000 square foot home, yes, you're going to have, misters that may be plugged and need to be adjusted, and propane heaters that aren't kicking on, or the TV, or as you mentioned, just there's so many components, there's millions of components, and there's a lot of money vested that there may be times where you have to come and service this, but be patient and understanding. And if I'm clear about that up front in my sales process, and then I'm clear about it on the back end of my contract, well, the client now understands where we're coming from.
Right. And it's not as much of a shock. And when you've got painters outside your bathroom and you're getting a shower in the morning and you're like, hey, what you doing here? It's a little bit easier to take.
Yeah, it is. Well, that's super valuable, Tracy. And I know you're super busy, and with your schedule, I can't thank you enough for making time to come on today.
Oh, what a treat. Thank you so very much for having me.
And where can our listeners find you?
So we are at Instagram our handle is at Tracy, and it's spelled Tracy Morris, Morris Design. So Tracy Morris Design, that's our handle. And then you can always find me at our website, tracymorrisdesign.com, and email me right off the website, and you can easily get in touch with us.
Well, Tracy, you're amazing. Thank you so much again.
Oh my gosh, thanks, Brad. Really awesome.